Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay. So, dear students, dear colleagues, dear guests, um, I would like to welcome you to the fourth lecture of De-coloniality Now online lecture series on interdisciplinary perspectives on coloniality and decoloniality. So this is the first lecture of the year 2025. Today, Professor Lisa Werkmeister Rozas from the University of Connecticut, USA, will deliver a lecture on decolonizing social work education, the profession's path toward liberation. She will critically examine the assumptions and values of the profession and discuss how to restore and especially recenter indigenous knowledge and practices. Lisa is a first generation Peruvian American professor and director of the Puerto Rican Latino Studies project at the University of Connecticut School of Social Work. Lisa began her career as a clinical social worker, working with Latin individuals and families. And after receiving her PhD in social work, she completed a postdoctoral fellowship at Yale University. And then she joined University of Connecticut in 2004. Uh, Her research and teaching interests focus on the examination of coloniality, white supremacy, implicit bias, and their effects on intersectional identities, and the importance critical consciousness has on advocacy and allyship. So she centers indigenous knowledge within higher education and the importance of a dialogic practice in teaching. She has also experience in healing. Maybe we will hear about that as well. And Lisa is currently conducting research with an NGO in Peru to provide community-led training for organizations that foster homeless children. And I'm happy to share with you that she co-authored the third edition of Racism in the United States, a book, Implications for the Helping Professions. So I really personally look forward to Lisa's lecture, and I'd like to invite her to deliver her lecture now. Please, Lisa.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. Um, to share. There we go. And into full screen mode. Okay. Oh, but it's not full screen. Oh, there it is. Okay. Everyone can see that okay?
Yes.
Got a problem? Okay. Wonderful. Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the welcome, and I hope that the new year has welcomed everyone with kindness. And yeah, I wanted to thank you for the introduction, and also, yeah, I just wanted to share that, yeah, I am a practitioner of the Inca cosmology, which is an indigenous practice that's been guarded by the Quero Indians of Peru for centuries. And so I'll be talking about this a little bit as I go along, just as it does inform my work, um, you know, as a professor and a researcher. So I will, let's see, I'm hoping this, I'm not going to have a problem advancing. Okay. So today I wanted to use the concepts that are outlined here as a way to explain how I came to understand coloniality and its presence and workings within higher education in general, but also speak specifically about social work education, particularly as we look towards finding ways towards liberation from coloniality. Um, and I'll start from looking at the colonial matrix of power, which is something that Anabel Quijano has kind of created, but then also people have been adding to. Um, and talk about what comprises coloniality, looking particularly at the coloniality of being and the coloniality of power, and how those have shaped and continue to order our social relations and connections and disconnections to all beings. We'll then explore the coloniality of knowledge that is operant in the knowledge production and legitimacy that is inherent within the systems of higher education. And finally, we'll look at two concepts that can help prepare us for liberation and decoloniality. And before I start, I do always want to give gratitude and thanks to the Pachamama, which is the universe and the keeper and being of all things. So thank you for that. So, okay, I've got the agenda. Yeah. So I'm going to start off with the colonial matrix of power, which I'll be referring to as the CMP for short throughout the lecture. And the colonial matrix of power, it's a complex structure of management and control that comprises four invisible forces that function together to deliver very visible consequences for the way epistemology and ontology have been co-opted to benefit those who control and manage the CMP. Quijano, along with others, Maldonado Torres, Mignolo, and Walsh, situate this concept within the false Eurocentric narrative of modernity, which claims societal development and progress, as defined by those in power, to be beneficial to all. Viewing these two schemes in tandem make evident how what are now considered to be the dominant ways of knowing not only control and manage the totality of knowledge, but also the status and definition of beings. The goal of the CMP has always been to separate, divide, and disconnect all beings by assigning greater value and status to those who manage and control their power. Those determined to have no value or far less value are ascribed a lower status of being or non-being and are barred from exercising any power within the system. The four pillars which constitute the CMP are white supremacy, patriarchy, Christianity, and capitalism. Each of these pillars have a long trajectory of domination and exploitation within the world order. Their assertions are supported by their own creation of knowledge, presented as universal and irrefutable. So the first that I'm going to talk about is Christian cosmology. This cosmology was used to establish hierarchy and domination of Christian thought and disavow or deny any subjectivity that does not abide by its truth and creates a hierarchy of being, what Maldonado Torres calls the coloniality of being. Christianity accomplishes this not only by privileging the Eurocentric cosmology, by rendering all other cosmologies and their followers uncivilized, godless, and without knowledge. The belief systems underlying their cosmologic understanding of humanity are codified in the very epistemic domains that they created. And those domains are mainly theology, philosophy, science, politics, economics, biology, and culture. Once accepted as knowledge, these ideas were distributed through the long reach of Europe's global power, dismissing all other non-European belief systems and knowledge emanating from them as illogical and irrelevant as the languages in which they were created. This act was essential in establishing what has come to be known as the totality of knowledge, crafted by a circular system of knowledge that those in power created and are guided by. It was Christianity that first put forth the Eurocentric premise that not all living organisms or beings possess the same status and value, and that nature was separate. It was a separate entity from humanity. This difference from many ancient cosmologies, which perceived all living organisms are entities that are part of the greater whole of life. One example comes from the Incan cosmology, which uses the word pacha to represent the concepts in space of concepts of space and time as concurrent and indivisible. This is at the center of their fundamental understanding that all living things, all things, are connected and related, constituting a unified Pachamama, which is often translated in English as Mother Earth, but more accurately, it really is sort of the universe overall. It was Eurocentric Christian cosmology that divided entities as well as time and space, and as a way of assigning different values to each, granting greater value to the entities which matched their own image. The Inca cosmology uses the concept of yanantin when referring to opposites, which is different than what we think about in terms of a binary. Although different, they are considered to be complementary opposites existing in harmony with each other. Christian theology is actually the one who kind of brought forth the concept of a binary as one of warring opposites, based on the assertion that binaries are a priori composed by an opposition of assigned value. Greater value was assigned to certain categories within sex and race, which ordered power and status. Encountering people who were unfamiliar with them, Christians used their framework of the binary to impose a hegemonic order of relations, which is where they held greater value and power. The second pillar, which is white supremacy, is we look at coloniality as upholding a racial hierarchy where non-whites are not only inferior, but subhuman. Maldonado Torres explains how humans were placed into zones of being human and not being human, or not being human enough. Non-whites were placed into the zone of non-being, while whites, both human and superior, occupied the zone of being. And that's a concept from Fanon. Which zone you occupy dictates whether the lived experience of your social identities are mitigated by race in the case of white privilege, or aggravated by race in the case of racial oppression. White Christian men were human and civilized. Males with darker skin and different phenotypes were not. Not only did European Christian cosmology continue the belief system of white supremacy by establishing the primacy of Eurocentric beliefs, language, and culture, but by default, other subjectivities deemed lesser and ignorant became disconnected from their sources of knowledge and being. Whites who had developed the value-based opposition of binaries maintained that those who were white had value and by virtue of having value had power. This enabled whites to anoint themselves as the natural keepers of knowledge, which solidified and maintained their power within the CMP. And just as Christianity and white supremacy make up the coloniality of being in terms of what establishes a being, patriarchy and capitalism make up the coloniality of power. So with patriarchy, the ascription of greater value is given to males over non-males. So those who might identify as females, non-binary, gender non-conforming, two-spirit, transgender. It initiated another hegemonic order of relations between European men and women, forming the patriarchal structure. To differentiate between Christian and non-Christian women, another category for a type of woman was created. Again, using the binary, women who were compliant with Christian ways were far more desirable and held higher value as opposed to women whose beliefs and comportment lay outside of the Christian patriarchal schema. At the same time, when encountered through the colonization process, Indigenous and African women were not considered women by Christian men. Patriarchal valuation of gender is also affected by white supremacist ideology, as some women who would be classified as white in some circumstances are granted superiority over men who would be classified as non-white. And this is where we start to see the beginning that race really takes on a very strong lens through which all people are ascribed value. So the distribution and valuation of work was based on racial identities through a racial social classification. Quijano also contends that the concentration of the control of productive resources and capital as social relations, including salary as a privilege of whiteness, affected the entire distribution of power among the world population. So this is where we see how capitalism really did begin to give a particular value of certain kinds of work over others. Basically, race and racism became the organizing principles of how hierarchies are structured in the modern world. But Grossvogel adds to Higano's matrix by contending that race, gender, sexuality, and spirituality and epistemology are not additive elements to the economic and political structure of the capitalist world system, but an integral, entangled, and constitutive part of the broad-webbed package called the European modern colonial capitalist patriarchal world system. By situating individuals within the context of these power structures, we are able to more fully analyze how they experience society and how society experiences them. I know that folks have gone over modernity in other lectures that I've seen, but I'm going to use Magnolo and Walsh's definition of modernity as a discourse that promises happiness and salvation through conversion, progress, civilization, modernization, development, and market democracy. This false narrative presents the Eurocentric advancing of a civilization as a utopia for all, hiding the destruction, dismissal, and repudiation of any other discourse found in non-European cosmologies. Modernity established the relational order of subject to object. The subject is bearer of reason, while the object is not only external to it, but different in its very nature. In fact, nature itself became an object. Once the subject characterizes an entity as an object, it places them outside of their realm. As an object, nature and all that constitutes nature is to be used to benefit the subject, extracting its resources in the name of progress and modernity, which does not benefit the object. Modernity also emphasizes and rewards rapidity and tangible deliverables when faced with finding a solution to a problem defined and created by the CMP. As a result, long-term plans, which may not result in immediate resolution, are rejected or abandoned, leaving no room for the dominating system to change. This, of course, serves the individuals who have created and are currently in control of the CMP. So we're going to talk a little bit about the legitimization of knowledge and the coloniality of knowledge. There are myriad knowledge sources originating from multiple ways of knowing. Different peoples use their historical and cultural understanding of the world to facilitate the transfer of values, beliefs, and traditions to the next generation. How we understand the origin, structure, and workings of the world and larger universe are generally presented within a coordinated belief system or cosmology. Ancient cosmologies, such as the Inca and the Hindu cosmologies, existed long before the Christian cosmology, which became the dominant cosmology of Western Europe. Cosmologies are important because they unify a people by providing a common understanding of roles, relationships, and ways of being. And it's not that the Christian cosmology is wrong or less than other cosmologies, but rather what is oppressive is the practice of universalizing it, making it the only credible way of understanding and defining the world and all that's in it. A system of domination is implemented through the appointment of an assertion that the Christian cosmology of Western Europe is the only legitimate worldview, requiring all to follow, believe, emulate, and mold to its standards and structures. This practice is a core tenet of coloniality. It affords its executors control over the management of society's economic, political, epistemic, and social standards. Legitimate knowledge has been constructed by those who have the authority to create and define what knowledge is. That authority has been controlled by those who inhabit the realm of being, namely white Christian men. In order to dominate how the world and how all of its entities are defined and interpreted, those with authority establish the realm of reason and rationality, two things that could only be disputed by its creators. Those who control and manage the CMP establish that organizing principle of knowledge, such as laws, assumptions, standards, theories, behaviors, and basic qualities, be based on their own values and beliefs about the world. This allows the CMP not only control over all domains of knowledge, but over all beings or entities residing in the world, whether inhabiting the realm of being or non-being. shaping their very existence within the confines of their specific European Christian cosmology. Whatever was encountered that lay outside of the worldview, this particular worldview, was deemed irrelevant, inferior, or dangerous. Entities that do not exist within a specific dominant framework are generally defined with the limitations of that framework. The what, or essence of something which exists outside any meaning or relevance to that framework, is dismissed or denied status. As Fanon states, quote, "For the colonized subject, objectivity is always directed against them," end quote, allowing any existence of knowledge they possess to be marginalized or repudiated. In order to maintain power, those who manage the CMP must sustain complete control. If they do not know or understand something, it will be discredited or prohibited. Think about this process as one of meaning making. Its sole aim is to control any and all conversations through messaging and established meaning, whether held within political, economic, or social contexts. What actually becomes legitimized knowledge is what Magnolo and Walsh call the content of the conversation. And we'll go over that more. So just as important as what gets defined or dismissed as legitimate knowledge is how things come to be defined through knowledge. What Magnolo and Walsh identify as the terms of the conversation. So we have the content of the conversation and we have the terms of the conversation. The terms of conversation is the way in which knowledge is legitimatized. How is the process of knowledge legitimization determined? Who is in control of the process of how knowledge is defined? What makes this so important is because in academia, knowledge content can be and has been over the years changed, redefined, updated, and repurposed. But the terms of knowledge, who creates it, determines what is legitimate, and the process of legitimization does not change. For example, the labels used for racialized minorities here in the United States, we would call that the content of the conversation. Within the US, how Black people have and are defined has changed from slave to Negro to Afro-American to African-American to Black. However, who creates, rejects, and accepts these labels or allows them to be used within an academic setting or not remains the same. They maintain the terms by and through which labels may change. Those who control and manage the CMP might allow content change through a preferred language, but they do not allow for the terms to change in terms of who is labeled Black and how a new label is presented and accepted. So here in the United States, we sometimes use the term BIPOC to stand for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. So I'll use that here too. BIPOC individuals within university settings have had to conform to the content and terms of the conversation in order to be granted entry. Still controlled by the terms created by the CMP, the content remains largely Western European centric. As a result, a change only in content perpetuates the power structure of coloniality, which continues to maintain the terms of how and who forms legitimate knowledge. Challenging the content of the conversation can be a useful endeavor, as it can introduce knowledge previously marginalized or excluded from the dominant knowledge frame. However, without changing the terms of the conversation, the knowledge runs the risk of being delegitimized or be given only supplementary status. Decoloniality of knowledge demands changing the terms of the conversation and making visible the tricks and designs created by the CMP. It aims at altering the principles and assumptions of knowledge creation, transformation, and dissemination. Without changing the terms of the conversation, these lives continue to be controlled by the CMP, or all beings continue to be controlled by the CMP. Since those who created and are in control of the CMP fashion institutions of higher education to propagate Western European Christian worldviews, which serve as the basis for secular knowledge today, colleges and universities continue to replicate and emulate this. The question of the totality of knowledge, therefore, shows the double face of modernity and coloniality. A, the consolidation of Eurocentrism as a system of interconnected knowledge, so the epistemic domains of the CMP, such as theology, philosophy, science, politics, economics, biology, culture, and B, the dismissal and disavowal of principles of knowing and created knowledge in non-European languages and non-European systems of belief. Universities perpetuate the paradigm of the totality of knowledge by insisting that domains of knowledge be kept separate in their silos of professional schools, disciplines, departments, diminishing the capacity of people within those domains to develop a holistic understanding of the world and the oppressive mechanisms that exist, uphold, and constitute the CMP. Divisions and separations between members of a university created in the name of professionalism and advancement continue to serve modernity and coloniality. The first separation is the formation of different disciplines, establishing that each particular discipline is responsible for a specific kind of knowledge. This not only narrows the spectrum of thought, but inhibits the formation of relationships through disciplines. Experts are created and anointed to not only guard the gates of their particular domain of knowledge, but also are created as a tool to keep the various domains of knowledge separate. This separation of knowledge source is unique to Western European cosmology. Most non-Western cosmologies place no delineation within the epistemological realm. Currently, in many institutions of higher education, there is a push to change what I would call the content of the conversation by encouraging and rewarding interdisciplinary scholarship. However, the terms of the conversation are not being addressed. Those who determine what constitute credible or robust scholarship remain the same. What methodologies provide evidence-based research remains largely the same. What kind of research production is supported through grant funding remains the same. How journals control the sources of knowledge, production, and dissemination through their standards of peer review remain the same. What constitutes standards for promotion and tenure and who establishes those standards remains the same. What elements of academic responsibility or professional behavior are over and undervalued still trend towards the Western European standards of success. A more robust vision of the world and the relations within it is essential to decoloniality. This means re-evolving a shared knowledge rather than relying on the myopic views of individual knowledge domains. Once the proprietors of various domains of knowledge relearn the connections they have with others, the task is to learn to work in and through them by erasing disciplinary boundaries. Knowledge paradigms do not belong to one discipline or another. Rather, they are all a part of a larger whole of what is known. This is what Gloria Anzaldúa and Walter Mignolo have talked about in their assertion of having more border thinking. So border thinking, critical border thinking, what Mignolo calls it, is the epistemic response of the subaltern to the Eurocentric project of modernity. It does not reject modernity in order to retreat into a fundamentalistic absolutism. It's rather border epistemologies subsume, redefine the emancipatory rhetoric of modernity from the cosmologies and epistemologies of the subaltern. Originally placed in the oppressed and exploited side of the colonial difference, these subaltern ways of knowing position us towards a decolonial and liberatory struggle for a world beyond a Eurocentric understanding of modernity. Border thinking values and affirms the cosmologies of the subaltern in order to redefine the rhetoric of emancipation. The rhetoric created by the Western European narrative of modernity can be transformed into an act of decolonial liberation. It redefines long-held epistemological and ontological understandings of knowledge, being, and world perception by relocating them outside the Euro-Christian-centric paradigms. This process of border thinking is an intervention, which leads us to a deeper sense of awareness. And this is really connected to what Anzaldúa also refers to as la facultad. It asks us to engage in la facultad, which is the capacity to see in surface phenomenon the meaning of deeper realities and to see the deep structure below the surface. It is a form of sensing the world beyond conscious awareness, which requires a reliance on knowledge sources such as nature, the spirit world, energy, and intuition that lay outside of our rational awareness. Not only does border thinking result in wholeness and knowledge, it also incorporates the belief that connection and relation to all entities are important sources of knowledge and part of our existence. We are one and the same of the existence. This kind of thinking challenges the content of the conversation by using other perspectives as touchstones for standards, but also the terms of the conversation by establishing the subaltern's process of connection, relationship, and knowledge transmission as legitimate. It is the revisioning of modernity and its promise of emancipation, liberation for both colonized and the colonizer, both of whom are denied their full human potential under coloniality. The process of border thinking is an intervention Mignolo really asserts and talks about, which leads us to greater awareness. I think I said that already. So now just talking a little bit about social work education and the domains of power of knowledge and being. The fundamental understanding of how power is structured within the context of coloniality is imperative because it is responsible for the domains of knowledge that has been legitimized and dismissed. Western European universities are one of the main power structures that were created to maintain and perpetuate coloniality. Now, a part of higher education, social work has become complicit with coloniality of being, power, and knowledge, being aligned with and working to advocate for people whose identities were often on the devalued side of the binary. Social work was itself devalued. Since entering into the space of higher education in its own discipline, social work has sought to find legitimacy within the world of academia. It has not only embraced but privileged research and scholarship that follows the standards and expectation of Western-centered ways of thinking. The policies and institutional structures within social work education that under or overvalue specific types of empirical knowledge production reproduce coloniality. The practice of decolonizing a social work education mainly consists of having some indigenous scholars placed in certain syllabi, presenting that work to some students, but which I would say that is the content of the conversation, but not changing the terms of the conversation, because otherwise we would be changing the actual power structure of those who control what determines legitimate knowledge. As long as there continues to be a centering of Western European cosmology, BIPOC and other scholars with marginalized identities will be treated as separate entities. Their scholarship will be extracted only to serve the needs of those who control and manage the CMP. Inserting the work of BIPOC scholars into the curriculum while keeping the powers of coloniality in place could result in an a la carte style of pedagogy, where instructors and students cherry pick the indigenous knowledge that can be situated alongside a pedagogy of coloniality. Mignolo has a really important perception that decoloniality is the exercise of power within the colonial matrix to undermine the mechanisms that keep it in place, requiring obeyance. Such a mechanism is epistemic, and so colonial liberation implies epistemic disobedience. In order to create a pedagogy of and towards decoloniality, the recentering of indigeneity must be prioritized along with working to abolish the CMP. So how do we recenter indigeneity in a society which has chosen to destroy much of it? So social work, I believe, possesses the basic tools for putting forth a pedagogy of decoloniality by introducing critical consciousness and critical realism to our students. So critical consciousness, perhaps many of you have heard it. It is something brought forth by Freire. Social work possesses this particular basic tool because we do value and currently teach these techniques and skills in order to pave the way towards decoloniality. For social workers to understand the complexities that lie within the realm of person and environment, it's central to our profession and our mission. Social work education recognizes the centrality of the skill of critical consciousness and often uses this Freirean concept. It's achieved through an iterative process of action and reflection. This critical awareness that is developed through continuous engagement and dialogue regarding the socio-political forces, such as the CMP, that order society's social relations, lays the foundation to be an agent of change. Students must be able to read the world with all of its visible and invisible power structures. This is done in order to transform them. What is sometimes overlooked is which version of the world are they reading? The version of the world put forth by Western European Christian cosmology intentionally limits our ability to dismantle its power structure. We are in and of the matrix of coloniality with no alternative references to another social order. In order to imagine another way, we must prioritize and expose our students to other cosmologies. Most are living under the influence of Western European hegemonic structures within a socio-political hierarchy that continues to impose Christian, white supremacist, patriarchal, and capitalist subjectivities. It's crucial to provide social workers access and understanding of subjugated cosmologies to broaden our consciousness of how things are when reading a different or subjugated version of the world. Rather than reading of or about these differences, students have to learn to think from and with them. This kind of thinking, doing, delinks undoes the centrality of Western thought. However, the effort and context for change must not exist solely on the level of colonialized knowledge, as that would change the content of the conversation, but not the terms. In other words, we must attach learning outcomes and competencies specific to the integration of Indigenous worldviews. Simply inserting works by Indigenous scholars into the curriculum is not enough. This unfamiliar dimensions that may exist within these non-European cosmologies, such as the spirit world, ancestral knowledge, relationship and connection to all entities, must be acknowledged as legitimate. Similarly, social work already believes that students must learn the role that dominant culture plays in unconsciously socializing individuals to believe in certain stereotypes that advantage those in power and oppose those without power. We already teach our students that we must unlearn the myths, stereotypes, and false narratives we have been brought up to believe about the world's social order. And we explain this need to relearn other ways of thinking and being in the world that rejects the categorization of beings and non-beings. What social work education has yet to do is engage in the liberation of the mind, body, and spirit from the mechanisms of coloniality. In order to do that, the rationality of mind, we must go beyond the rationality of mind. We must endeavor to create our capacity, or la facultad. So another way to do this, along with border thinking and looking at critical consciousness, is, again, focusing on these unseen structures. And doing that, we can introduce the concept of critical realism. One of those leaders is Roy Bhaskar, and he posits three aspects of this theory that I believe are relevant to decoloniality. One is the prioritization of ontology over epistemology, how inquiry can be organized, and the importance of creating a place and space for human agency. First, rather than emphasizing what an individual knows or is able to regurgitate, priority is placed on being a living entity in the world. People's lived experiences within an ontological state of being in the world is believed to be paramount to all knowledge transmission and interaction. It is within this state that people are truly in relation and connected to other people in all aspects of life. Second, Bhaskar interrogates the structure of how information is requested and received. Critical realism posits that there is more than one level of reality. The first level, which is empirical, constitutes what we see and experienced firsthand. The second level is the realm of actual, constitutes what occurs and is real, whether or not it is experienced by an individual person. And finally, the third level comprises causal forces that are mechanisms that support and maintain the power relations, invisible and real. When utilized with critical consciousness, this theory allows students to read a different version of what is considered the real world. It is an important theory that disrupts the dominant idea of reality by giving legitimacy to the unseen forces that shape our world, as well as uncovers power structures that order our social world. It is in this realm of the unseen that this theory offers an alternate way of seeing and being in the world, acknowledging that reality occurs on more than one levels for all aspects of individuals' lived experiences to be validated. The empirical experiences of individuals possessing targeted identities have long been discounted, questioned, or invalidated. The recognition that what occurs on an individual level is real should be respected. Such an experience is then supported by the notion of the actual level, which exists even though others may or may not experience what occurred. In this case, it matters not whether someone disbelieves an event that occurs on the empirical level because they did not see it. The actual level gives credence to the lived experience of those individuals whose perspectives are subjugated. It also indicates that these empirical experiences, not experienced by those dominant identities, impacts them on the realm of the actual and therefore limits their development and understanding of the world. The causal level is created by the oppressive forces that, although unseen, manifest themselves in very real circumstances that perpetuate and maintain the CMP. And finally, the third aspect of critical realism, which is essential to decoloniality within social work education, is enabling the primacy of human agency over knowledge as defined by the CMP. It is not only on the micro level where Bhaskar believes agency has a place in space, it is also on the meso and macro levels. Education is key to helping enable human agency, individual and collective, and the collective on all three levels of reality. Rather than believing in modernity's false narrative that the end goal is freedom granted through economic and political power, critical realism recognizes the need for liberation and its inextricable link to one's dialectical relationship with and in the universe. This is crucial for the development of La Facultad. This understanding of reality and relationship, although aligned with an indigenous cosmology, more aligned with indigenous cosmology than Western European, is a very familiar framework to social work. And then, one more. So within Inca cosmology, the spirits of the Apus, that are the mountains, Huacos, that are the spiritual rocks, Huyas, which are objects that actually hold spiritual and energetic experiences, hold tremendous unseen power and facilitate connections with ancestors, animals, spirits, and the land. The power is established and harnessed through recognition and dialectical connection with those who have come before us and an obligation to those who come after us. Social work education has long stressed the importance of relationship and connection. Social workers understand the importance of family context, person, and environment, whether it be through relationships established through clinical, community, organizational work. There is an understanding and belief that these connections are a foundation of social work. The work is to utilize a more inclusive, multidimensional understanding of the environment that the person is in. Through relationships, we use our humanity to help, heal, facilitate, and transform another person's situation. The recognition of their own strength, worth, and wisdom. There are many other ways social work education can support this decolonial process. So, talked about critical consciousness and really looking at some of the larger organizing structures that we have and that we are connected to as social workers. So also looking at those who control such knowledge sources and really looking to uncouple the understanding of the dominant worldview in terms of how things have been defined within the duality of being and non-being. And so disrupting and transforming the CMP framework endeavors that we reject the freedom offered by changing the mere content of the conversation. Instead, we work towards and accept nothing less than the liberation from coloniality, which comes by changing both the content and the terms of the conversation and reviving subaltern cosmologies through critical action, reflection, and critical consciousness development. Thank you. And I do have, not that you read them all, but my sources.
Mhm.
So should I stop sharing?
Thank you very much, Lisa.